We start with the fallout to Ken versus the Hawks, a $20,000 fine. Let's recap what was said post, and then we'll dive into what's happened.
Jack said what he said through the week, and I just told him after the game he wasn't going anywhere.
Right.
And you know what? I don't know social media. I just do what I do. I probably shouldn't have done it. I should apologise to the boys. I shouldn't have probably done it. But the reality was, you throw something our way, we're going to throw something back occasionally.
We had a very young player who was having had some very aggressive words said to him by a much older man who's been in the game for a long time.
It's not the first time that Ken's done that, won't be the last, but it's an emotional game and sometimes it gets the better of us.
And it was the AFL Sanctions Day that shocked many. This was the quote from Stephen Mead, the AFL General Counsel. As we reiterated last week, opposition officials and players inappropriately engaging each other is something we don't want to see because of the potential to escalate and the example that it sets for football at lower levels. And we are disappointed the moment took away from what was one of the great finals matches. It's a $20,000 fine, Caro, that hasn't gone over well at Port. And it's been very divided around the competition today.
It's even divided people within AFL headquarters, Craig, because as Paul Marsh said earlier this year when Jeremy Finlayson was suspended for 4 weeks over a homophobic slur, the AFL is consistently inconsistent. Now, they say they hold coaches to a higher standard. So why then was Alistair Clarkson only getting a suspension and Finlayson gets a proper suspension? Why is it as bad to make an idiot of yourself and behave in a graceless fashion as Ken Hinkley did compared to what Jason McCartney did last weekend when he clashed with a footballer in the heat of battle, and he's got priors and Ken doesn't. I think the AFL is internally saying they came down harder on Ken Hinkley for several reasons. One, because it was off the back of McCartney, and this is becoming a habit among coaches and officials, and they need to nail it and get rid of it now. Ken Hinkley did swear. He said, you're not going anywhere, you cheeky little F word. That's what he said to Ginnivan. And the third thing is, which is just fascinating, because Ken Hinkley was pretty contrite in that interview with Brian Taylor, more contrite at his press conference, more contrite again in an interview on SEN on Saturday.
They don't think the apology cut it, do they?
The AFL don't think Port is contrite.
That's unbelievable.
They think that not only did Ken not seem sorry enough, but that in the negotiations over the weekend...
rounds on the weekend in the media, he put himself forward.
No, but it was also the Port hierarchy, and I gather it was Matthew Richardson, the CEO of Port Adelaide, who was dealing with this, with Stephen Mead, the General Counsel. The feeling was that in all the negotiation and all the back and forward over the weekend, Port was not contrite.
Was it too tough?
The penalty was, 100%. Like, Ken Hinkley's honest, puts his hand up, admits fault. I apologise to the boys. I'm assuming he's saying I apologise to the Hawthorn players. You're right. Press conference, media the next day. I know he's not paying this fine himself, but the coaches...
No, that's another thing.
So he's paying the fine?
The club has been fined, but Ken Hinkley has gone to the club and said, this was me, I need to pay this because it's my fault.
That's another admission that he did the wrong thing.
I agree.
And he wants to now move on and put it past them and move on to Friday night. But the Coaches Association, where they have been in this, like you saw Paul Marsh running around to everyone last week, sticking up for his players. Where is the Coaches Association here? The most toothless organisation in the history of
Well, that's the least surprising element of this whole story.
What's the point of them?
I think
how could they not defend?
It doesn't make up... the fact that he's under enormous pressure and he was asked a day before the game, does he think he'll be sacked if they lose?
He's asked that every week. He's asked that every week.
Where the pressure he's under shouldn't be an excuse, but given everything he has been under, and yes, he did the wrong thing. It was terrible what he did, and it is a pity it took away from the game.
Is it terrible or was it cheeky?
You've got Richard Goyder the next night at the next game, the AFL chairman, saying to officials from both Brisbane and GWS, this is a disgrace, it's taken away from a great game and no one's talking about the game. You can't say that this hasn't made footy central to the entire national conversation.
It's been great for all of us, but I think, in my opinion, it's taken away from the job that Ken Hinkley, Chad Corns and all the Port Adelaide guys devised to take down the Hawthorn Football Club. So that's the disappointing part.
And then the irony of this was there's a lot of high-profile ex-Hawthorn figures in the media, and ironically they were all up in arms about Ken's behaviour in the first place.
I thought it was embarrassing from my point of view. The how he did it and where he did it, you understand Luke Bruce was coming off. There's going to be a guard of honour, recognising a champion of the game, 300 games. I don't think there was anything to be gained.
As a coach, that's pretty disappointing. You'd think, I reckon Ken as a coach would sit back and go, we've just had a win, a great win. We should be talking about how well our team played. Instead, a coach is there mouthing off to a losing side. Pretty poor form.
I thought it was dreadful I thought it was absolutely dreadful. It showed a chink in his armour, his inability to control his emotions. You cannot lead 40-something men if you behave like this.
Well, he can lead 40-something men behaving like that. And yes, he does show his emotions too much. You know, they didn't say anything when Alistair Clarkson was doing this, these Hawthorn greats. So there's a bit of hypocrisy there, but they missed the major... They had to make that point. But what about Jack Ginnivan? What about the fact that their man, Jack Ginnivan...
You said it cost him a premiership on the weekend.
No, I said if you take this to it... I think you could argue he cost them the game because it was a 4-point game.
You intimated that he could have cost them a premiership.
Well, I think Hawthorn was playing good enough footy to win the premiership. I honestly do, and I'm not just saying that now. We all thought that. We all thought that last week.
Do you really think one Instagram post could...
It hasn't, Hutchie, but I want to know...
You know what I'm saying, though? You take it to its logical conclusion, and everyone uses anything to win a game.
Have you delved deep into Hawthorn and what they did with Jack during the week?
Yep.
Have you found... What did they do to Jack? Like, the moment he said that, how hard did they speak to him, and what's the future for him?
Well, James Sicily, said that he expressed regret. No one at Hawthorn will admit this publicly. No one will say whether it was Ginnivan who went to the leaders and the players or whether the players went to him. My understanding is senior players went to Jack and he then expressed regret and said he wished he hadn't done it. And so they should have. I mean, you last week, the minute we showed that tweet, said, oh, we don't like that.
Mortified. I said, you want to play well.
I want to ask you about Jack and when they take it in a moment. But you talked about the motivation. This is what the Hornet had to say, and then this was Lee Matthews also on the weekend.
Yes, I mean, it was a bit of a laugh and then a bit of anger, I guess, as well. Like, I guess already ruling us out before we've even played, after our Geelong performance. But I think that was the emotion around the group, was people not backing us in. And so there was a bit of anger throughout the group.
Coaches who can be emotionally volatile, it's not surprising their team can be volatile in their performance. And Port Adelaide this year have been like that. People stick up for Jack Ginnivan because some of the media twits just like the fact that there's something to talk about. But anything that stimulates and unites the opposition is to be avoided.
And everyone had an opinion, including Jeff Kennett, who weighed in on you, Caro, for most of the weekend. Why is Caroline Wilson such a one-trick pony? She's only about controversy and goes on to talk about costing Hawthorn the game. I wonder which GWS player Caroline Wilson will blame this morning for their loss to Brisbane. He didn't miss you all weekend on the phone, Caro.
While we're speaking of Jeff Kennett, why would you give an interview the week before your club's big moment, their big final, and have another crack at Alistair Clarkson and his role in their recent history? To have a go at their culture again and to continue this division that is going to hurt the club until it's mended is just so damaging. Look, I don't care what anyone says. What Port Adelaide did with that message was not say, Jack Ginnivan, how dare he. This is how the entire football world is looking at us. We're irrelevant. We have to show, after what we did last week, that we're relevant. Now, why would you give them that ammunition, and why would you not argue that it could have cost them the game? I think it did.
Just on Ginnivan, I love the pageantry around Ginnivan.
You said he's the best thing.
I think he's fantastic. It is an interesting intersection in his career, this, after... he finds himself back here again. Where does it go in the off-season? There's a little early day acca in the eyes of others, not me, but in others.
No, in the eyes of me. And this is okay. Like, everyone's allowed to have a beer in the off-season. Post it on Instagram if you want. But last year I was critical of him for not turning up on day one of pre-season at a new club. Now, there's some players that come back and make statements in the pre-season. I think he needs to be one of them. I think he needs to have the biggest, hardest pre-season that he's ever had. Get himself rock hard, super fit.
Played well, though. He had a good season.
Yeah. But he's at the 6 and he needs to get to a 9 of his capabilities and his potential. He can do that, but it's not going to happen unless he puts in the work. So he's a big watch for this pre-season, Lauder.
We spoke before about the win that Port Adelaide had, and I just thought the strategy around what they did with Hawthorn. So wanted to show some vision here is they gave them no outlet. So you look at the positioning of the Port Adelaide players. Hawthorn wanted to keep using the hand, but every time they handballed, there was a Port Adelaide player ready to take their space. I wanted Hawthorn to kick the footy. Just stop the pressure. So you can see every time there was a Port Adelaide player ready to press in. So Jason Burgoyne tonight on 3AW said we were not refusing to give them the open side of the ground. We wanted to keep them on the skinny side, not allow them to get into open space. And they just ran themselves into trouble. And that isn't just pressure and Kenny going, we've got to pressure the life out of them. This is strategy in their pressure as well, and something to watch, and the rest of the competition will watch for what Port Adelaide did the other night.
You have to hand it to them. They were very well coached
And yet Hawthorn, they're going so well. They didn't play that well, and yet they nearly won. So the Port Adelaide footy boss, we reported here 2 weeks ago, has been approached by the Collingwood Football Club to replace Graham Wright. He was interviewed over the weekend about that role, and it looks like Port could be losing one of their main men.
Have you told Collingwood no?
Well, it's certainly a no for right now. I mean, at the end of the day, Port Adelaide have got some decisions to make into the future about, the way that we all need to take the club forward. And, at some point, for us all, the club needs to move on. I think I do a reasonable job, but equally, this is professional sport, and I want Port Adelaide to be, a high-performing team as we possibly can.
Well, it's pretty interesting too that Chris Davies, who normally does these negotiations with the AFL, he did over the concussion massive fine they got a few years ago, where they think also they've been singled out when other clubs like Geelong haven't. He left it to Matthew Richardson. I think that shows a level of frustration from the Port Adelaide Football Department towards the AFL hierarchy
they're not happy
at the moment.
All with the AFL. There's
They're
no
filthy.
doubt about that. So as good as Port Adelaide were, Lord, I still think there's some areas to work on this week. No, with no Houston, no Burton, no Farrell. I thought their ball use across half-back stood out, particularly when the game became a frenzy. So these high balls, shallow entries inside forward 50 is not going to cut it against Sydney this week. That will be mopped up and then they will be gone. It'll be Campbell, it'll be Blakey, it'll be Goulden, it'll be Lloyd. They'll be away. So launching the footy into your forward line behind centre is just not going to work. So I just thought they got sucked into this sort of stuff, this high rubbish inside forward 50. That's got to find an option, come around the other side and get a deeper entry. That can't happen this week.
And an awkward one at the end of the game for you, wasn't it, when your favourite player, Horn Francis, couldn't finish with cramp in the minute. Game on the line, it's final, best player for Port, he's not there. You, of course, committed very hard earlier in the year to Harley Reid when you had this to say.
If he wants to be the best, he's got to have his training standards to a level.
How do you know what his training standards are?
Well, because I'm seeing him in the last 5 minutes of a game. That was a concern for me to see how out on his feet he was late in a game that was nowhere near as high pressure as the Collingwood one.
So walk us through how this is different when Horn Francis couldn't finish the game in the last minute. Were you too hard on Harley Reid, or do you regret those comments now?
This is not one bit different. This is exactly the reason I said that, because 2 minutes to go in a cutthroat final and he's not out there.
So he's not fit enough?
Well, no. No, he's not. His body is not capable of playing to the level for. I mean, it was 87% game time, Horn Francis, which was probably a season high for him. He's only done one full pre-season because the surgery that he's had on his hamstring. So he needs to look at that.
So you're saying he let Port Adelaide down the same way Harley Reid did earlier?
Well, he's a young player, so he's 21. I said
you didn't give Harley that.
No, I did. I absolutely did. I said he's got to work on his training standards, question himself whether he's done everything. Same question applies for Horn Francis. As good as he's been, as much as he's my favourite player in the game, as much as he's a match winner and a star, he wasn't out there for the last 2 minutes of the game, and that could have cost them. So that's
just quickly, which other Port players will you put the acid on this week to get them up, as you did last week with Zach Butters and
Were you put up to that last week with Butters and Rosie?
No, I just
did your job.
Did you try and inspire an out-of-form player and an injured player to lift on behalf of the club?
No, I just didn't.
It's a fair question.
I just didn't think Butters was injured enough to be subbed out at half-time, and I said as much as that upset a few people. And for Connor Rosie, I think even he would admit that his form had been down. So to answer your question, I thought they were both excellent physically, nearly 20 tackles between them, but there's another level that I think both of them can go to this week.
Let's get to our final spotlight for this week's game with Port.
Hutchie, it's around Todd Marshall, and unfortunately Todd won't play again. He's been ruled out with concussion. So I want to put this to, this is the incident where, look to the back of the neck there, but he's been ruled out with concussion, couldn't play the game for the second half. Charlie Dixon was an issue the week before that.
Big issue. Big issue.
So, Kane, if they don't, do they go Charlie Dixon, or do they bring in just the next best young player to play in that forward line? Who could it be if it's not Dixon? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a big decision for them, Lordo. So let's go the pros of Charlie Dixon. He can be good fresh, but you don't want to be seduced by that. The other pro is that he's your second ruck. You don't have to force Ollie Wines to go into the ruck, but you just have to see how he's moving. If he's not moving to the level where he can get across the ground and cover it for 120 minutes, then I don't know, you probably go to McEntee and try and go a bit more chaotic and on the ground inside forward 50, but that will be a big decision for the coaches.
So I want to know, Kane, there's my opinion of Houston's been damaged a little bit, tarnished a little bit, the way he's handled it. If you want to get out, then he goes and his papers says I'm in, radio stations I'm in, papers, and now 4 clubs are talking.
Yeah.
What do you make of this situation with Houston?
Yeah, I'm a bit with you. I think he's let himself down. I just think we're at the point where he wasn't going to play for the rest of the season anyway.
Yeah.
So I think a bit more honesty and openness about where his future is, because he committed to the club and then it's revealed that he'd been meeting with 4 other clubs. So like Tom Barrass, I thought he made a fool of himself when he said that he wasn't going to go to another club, and I think Dan Houston's done the same.